Hey there, do-it-yourselfers. We're working on my 2004 Toyota Tundra today again, and going to do some timing belt service. Going to be taking off several parts to get there, multi-steps, so probably just kind of get things as we go. I've already taken some things off the engine. At this point, battery's been taken out. Obviously, you would want to at least disconnect the battery. Doesn't necessarily have to be taken out, but disconnect it before you start working. We've taken the air intake off. Normally you've got the plate that says 4.7 right here, liter engine. So that's taken off, as well as the air intake. Had an aftermarket engine intake on this, but whether you've got stock or aftermarket doesn't matter. It's gonna have to come off. And then at this point, the only other thing we've done is we've taken off the bottom plate. That's down here. That's the same bottom plate that you take off anytime you change the oil. There's 6 bolts on that, 4 in the front, 2 in the back. So, but that's where we are right now, and we'll kind of keep you updated as we go through step by step.
Turn the bottom away from you, right?
Next step is we're going to drain the antifreeze out. We're at the bottom of the radiator. Going to turn the petcock and drain the fluid. Turning the petcock with a pair of pliers with the tape to prevent marring. Next, we're disconnecting the transmission oil cooler hoses on the bottom of the radiator. You see this one's right next to the main lower radiator hose, so this one has to come off. And then there's another one right here. It's also to the transmission oil cooler. And those are the two right now. Of course, those main hoses will have to come off as well. We're going to take this radiator out of here. Sometimes you don't have to, but we find that it provides for good clearance, and it's not too difficult to take it out. Here you can see that the hose, transmission or oil cooler hose has been, transmission oil cooler hose has been removed it with some good needle nose, bent nose pliers, and then we've put bags and tie wraps around them to catch the transmission fluid. There's another one over here that we're going to do as well. So we got those transmission oil cooler hoses out. Now we're taking out the now we're taking out the main radiator hoses. This is the upper one. You can see we've already taken the clamps back and just wiggled it out of there. Next, we're going to take this lower one out that goes down and into the radiator. Next, we've taken the bottom half of the radiator shroud out. It just has 4 clips on it, 2 metal clips and then 2 plastic stays on the bottom. That just slid out of there. That provides clearance so that you can then get to the rest of the radiator and the fan, the rest of the shroud. Next, we're going to take the rest of the fan shroud out. You have 4 10mm bolts, 2 on each side. Get those bolts, and then the whole shroud comes out, or the rest of it anyways. There's the fan exposed. Next, we're going to get the radiator. 4 bolts on the radiator, 1 here, 1 there, and then same thing on the other side. So all 4 bolts of the radiator have been removed. You've got 2 clips here, 2 hooks, one on each side of the radiator. So we're going to lift the radiator up slightly, tilt the top toward the engine, pull it out, and place it out of the way. Okay, at this point we're going to drain the coolant out of the block. That will help when we're getting other hoses out of this, off of this, and replaced for the project. Trying to show you the drain for the block. It's back on the right side of the engine. It's kind of hard to see, but that should be it right there. Connect the hose. So the block is draining, and now we're taking off the serpentine belt. It's halfway off already at this point, but what we've done is we've taken the belt tensioner, box end wrench, 14 millimeter. You pull it down like so. That releases all the tension, and you can take it off. If you don't know the way this thing is routed, it's good to take a picture before you take it off of there. On this truck, we've got a label right here on the radiator support brace with how to route it. Next, we need to get the fan and the clutch apart. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take 2 12 millimeter wrenches, one on each side, like this one here, and then we'll put another one on the other side, right, like so, and on the opposite side, and just work around this to loosen these 4 nuts to get this off, because as you can see, this thing's freewheeling, and it's not always easy to get some leverage on it, so that's why you need to use the 2 wrenches. Okay, so after you get these bolts loosened by using 2 wrenches, you get down to the last one. It's going to be a little difficult, but if you've broken it loose once using the 2 wrenches, then you can use a strap wrench around this pulley to hold it tight while you loosen that last one. And then once they're loose, they come out real easy. So once you get those bolts off, fan and the clutch come off that like so. We're also taking off the pulley itself. We're down to that. Okay, at this point, so we've got some good clearance in here, as you can see. And what we're going to do is we're going to work top down and start removing items, removing hoses. This is going to have to come out. This whole assembly is going to have to come out here so we can get to the timing belt. Here's an idler pulley. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to replace this since we're in here. Same with the belt tensioner assembly. It's going to have to come out. I'm going to replace this as well. But then we're going to move down the engine. Of course, this is the water pump. We're going to remove and replace that. Remove and replace some hoses here as well. Just getting things out of the way and preparing to replace the timing belt. Okay, so you can see here where I've removed this thermostat housing. 2 bolts are on this piece. 1 and 2. Took those 2 bolts out, wiggled it out. You can see it's got a seal right here that'll have to be replaced. Some RTV silicone sealant will be used on the water passage there as well. But this has to come out. I also took this hose off of this nozzle right here, where you can see it right there. So I've taken that off as well, and in anticipation of having to take that hose off completely. Next, we've got 1 bolt on the idler pulley. That's a 14 millimeter. I've already loosened that. We just strictly take that right out. Again, I'm going to replace the pulley, but that's that. Next, we're going to go to the belt tensioner. You've got 2 two nuts here on studs. Those have already been loosened up. Those are 12 millimeter. You got a 14 millimeter here that's connected to the alternator as well. There's another one below here. That's also going to have to be loosened. That's part of the alternator assembly because it's partially blocking where the final one is. You can kind of see where it's partially blocked. Okay, at this point, to continue taking off the belt tensioner, we're going to take off the cover over one of the camshaft, front of the camshaft, and the cover that's also partially covering the belt tensioner. So at this point, we've got those two covers out. We've caught our first glimpse of the timing belt, and now we have better access to the belt tensioner, the drive belt, the accessory drive belt tensioner right here. So at this point, we've disconnected the power steering pump here. It had a stud and two bolts, one underneath. Those were taken apart, loosened, and then to get it to slide it off of this stud, had to come over here. There's a clip behind the power steering pump reservoir. Push that out, and then you're able to lift this up to be able to move the power steering pump. We're not disconnecting the power steering pump because then we'd have fluid everywhere and have to deal with that. Next, we're looking at the alternator so that we can move it out of the way to be able to get the belt tensioner out of the way. Okay, so at this point we've taken the alternator loose and put it down and rested it on the frame. No need to disconnect it. Like I say, just rest it on the frame. It's not going anywhere. Now we have the last bolt that was on the bottom of the adjustment, and the belt tensioner, and now the belt tensioner just slides out like that. It's got that big flange on there. We're going to be replacing the belt tensioner because while we're in here, we're going to be replacing a lot of different parts like that. Okay, so now we're over on the left side of the block, and we're taking off some hoses and a metal pipe. And when you do that, because it's part of the oil cooler, take these two, there's one bolt there, here, there's another bolt down here that comes off. Once you take those two off, then you remove it like this, you can see where you take that oil cooler off, or this hose off the oil cooler, and you're going to have all kinds of coolant come out. So you need to be prepared for that, have something to catch all the coolant. So at this point we've taken some wiring that's in this area, disconnected the harness, taken it out of the holders, wrapped it up, tie wrapped it over here on the air conditioning hose, and now we've taken 4 nuts out on the side, or bolts out on the sides. Then there's also a nut that goes right here. Take all that out, and then the cover to the camshaft comes off. There's also a rubber boot that goes around that wire that you have to remove as part of the cover. So we're taking the water pump out next, and most of the bolts are right out front. You can see them, bolts and nuts. There's 4 of them that you can see from the top of the engine. This one right here, if I can point to it, right there, is hidden towards the bottom of the engine, hidden by a bracket that holds up the air conditioning compressor. So we've taken this bracket out, holding the bracket. It has a nut and a bolt on it. Taking that bracket out, you can see that's where the bracket was. Taking that out to gain clearance to the last bolt for the water pump, which is coming out, and we'll be replacing that. Okay, so we've just pulled off the fan bracket. That's the back end of it. So now that the fan bracket's out of the way, we're about to put the engine into top dead center with the crankshaft bolt, and then after that we're going to pull the crank pulley off with an air impact. Okay, so we've got the air compressor going at this point, getting ready to take off that crankshaft bolt. But you can see we've moved the engine clockwise to line up with top dead center. You can see where we've got the 0 mark on the crankshaft pulley. On the camshaft pulleys, they're lined up. You've got a mark there that shows top dead center. And then on the right side, you've got it as well. And you've even got the green marker on there to indicate top dead center. Okay, so here we've got the air impact, and what we've done is taken a 22 millimeter air impact socket, put it on the bolt, and we've already spun really well, and just loosened this bolt. And now we take that out, and this bolt's loose. And then we can take the whole pulley off. And it's keyed, so you have to be careful when you're taking it off. Okay, so there's your crank pulley taken off. They don't always slide out of there as easily as this one did. Sometimes you might need to use a puller, but in this case we were fortunate, didn't have to. When you slide it back on, you may want to put a little bit of lubricant in the shaft, or in the hole where it goes over the shaft. And again, you can see where it's keyed. I also recommend that we're putting the parts out as we go and lining them up so that when we start reinstalling, we'll know where all the parts are and how they went on. Okay, here we're taking off the lower timing cover. You've got 4 bolts, one inset there, another one over here, and then there's one on the bottom. Take those 4 10 millimeters off, and then that one comes right out. Okay, so the timing belt cover has been removed, and then we've got this gear and cover, and you can see how it's beveled, and it's beveled away from the belt. You see, so that these teeth don't ride on the belt. So when you remove it, again, it's keyed as well. You take it off, but you want to make sure, you can see the bevel on this. We'll make sure the bevel goes inward. Okay, so with everything out of the way and the timing belt fully exposed at this point, we go down and we're working on the belt tensioner right here. And what we've done is backed off the 2 bolts on the belt tensioner. Slowly, back and forth, these 2 bolts, which is backed off the tension here, right here, and now our belt is loose because we've taken off the tension. Next we're going to be replacing the tensioner, replacing the belt, replacing these bearings here, back up a little bit, these bearings here, this one here, this one here. Okay, the tension's been taken off of the belt, and as you can see, we have removed the belt. Timing belt is off. Next, we are going to take off this bearing. Takes an Allen wrench or socket. In this case, it looks like it's a metric 10 millimeter Allen that we're going to take off there. I'm going to take this off. There's a bolt in the middle of this bearing. It's going to be taken off as well. Okay, so at this point we've removed the bearing on the right side of the engine. And now we've went ahead and removed several bolts on the water pump. And I'll show you, here's the new water pump using an Aisin brand, which is a Toyota supplier. You can see there were 2 bolts on the right side of the engine. And you had 3 other bolts on the left side. Some of these were already done. There's a nut that was on the left side. Some of these were already loosened, as we went through other parts of the engine. Then you got these two longer shafts. Those are all removed, and now the water pump is ready to be removed from the engine. We've already broken the seal, taken off that one bearing, and we're just sliding it out. Got a little coolant coming out, but there it is. There's your water pump. You can see the gasket and things. Well, obviously we're going to be replacing those as well. Okay, so at this point we spent some time trying to clean off the gasket surface for the new water pump. Got it flush. Just been careful scraping it with flat blade screw. What we've got here is we've got a new gasket going on, part of the kit with the water pump. This is the kit we recommend, the aisin. It is a supplier of Toyota. With the kit, it's got the contents here and it's got the part number. This was ordered off of Rock Auto. So we've slid the new water pump on. You have to be careful right here in this spot. Whoops. In this spot, because that's where a tube is, and you have to put a new O-ring on that. Comes with the kit, the aisin kit. But I mean, you slide it on very gently and mate all the surfaces on the new water pump. Now we're going to put the studs and the bolts back in, and we're going to torque it to the proper specs. Okay, so at this point we've snugged up the bolts and the studs on the water pump. The studs here, this stud here, and this one, and then this nut down here as well has been snugged to 18 Newton meters. The rest of the bolts that are on the water pump are snugged to 21 Newton meters. Water pump's in, as you can see. Now we're putting in the new idler pulley, again from the aisin kit we ordered from Rock Auto. We're putting a little blue thread locker on this bolt. We're going to tighten it up to 34.5 Newton meters or 25 foot-pounds. Okay, the same kit has a new bearing where the tensioner is placed, so we're going to put that new bearing on. We've also placed some thread locker on the threads. This is the Allen wrench, and it will also be torqued to 34.5 or 34.5 Newton meters, 25 foot-pounds. Okay, so here we've got the old belt tensioner and the new belt tensioner from the kit. You'll notice the new one has a pull pin. We're not going to pull that yet. We're going to wait. This one is already extended because it's the old one. But you'll see how this one is not extended at this point. And once you pull that pin, it will extend. So you wait until you get the belt installed before you pull that pin. But we're going to go ahead and install it with the bolts, and it's going to be torqued to 25 Newton meters or 19 foot-pounds. Make that 26 Newton meters. Okay, at this point the new belt is on. Started down here at the crank and got it around that. Kept it tight going up toward the left pulley. Kept it tight around the left pulley. Made sure we're at top dead center on the left pulley. Then brought it around. We still have some slack here on the right. So we've got this special tool. This particular one is from Mac Tools, but you could find them elsewhere. But this special tool helps hold the pulleys, and we have pulled the other pulley on the right to top dead center as well. And so now we're ready to make sure the tensioner is fully seated, and then we're going to pull the pin to place the tension back on the belt. As they say in shop manuals, installation is the reverse of removal. Now that we've got our belt on, we put the plate back on in the correct position. and then the bottom timing cover. Timing belt cover goes on next. We're going to just snug these bolts up. Not a lot of torque on those. Okay, next we're going with a fan pulley bracket. This is the old one. We've got a new part. Alright, so at this point we have the crank pulley back on. We've got our top dead center located on all of our pulleys. As you can see, had to work the timing belt a little bit to do that, but crank bolt and pulleys back on. The bottom timing cover is back on. Next we're going to put the bracket that goes for the fan, and that's down here. You don't have to replace this, but this is some place where you might get some squeaking in this bearing, so we're going to go ahead and replace that with a new part. Again, we ordered that from Rock Auto, Aisin brand, which is a Toyota supplier. Here's the part number. Okay, we've got the fan bracket back in. The smaller nuts are torqued to 16 Newton meters, and the larger ones are torqued to 32 Newton meters. And then there's, of course, this one here and one on the bottom side of the compressor that are also the larger nuts, so they're on 32 as well. Next we're going to put a bracket back underneath the compressor, and then we're going to move up the engine, putting things back in order. So we've replaced the cover here on the driver's side left camshaft. 7.5 Newton meters is all you put on these. Like I said, just basically snug them up. Then we're going to replace this. We're going to go ahead and replace the, whoops, put that back. We're going to replace the hose on these, and of course, once we replace the hose, and we're going to put them back on there, but this hose is going to be replaced, and this hose down here is going to be replaced. Toyota parts, because that's basically the only place you can get these things. Since we've got things shaping up on the left side of the engine, we're now going to go to the right, back to the right side of the engine, and I'm going to go ahead and put the accessory belt tensioner, serpentine belt tensioner back in along with the alternator. Since we have about 160,000 miles on this truck, we're going to go ahead and replace the original belt tensioner with this unit. Rock Auto didn't have an Aisin brand, so we're going to go with the Gates 38488. Okay, so here we've placed the belt tensioner back in, the accessory belt tensioner. Put this bolt in first. You see it there, right there. That one's 16 Newton meters, and then put these two bolts. These two bolts here back on the alternator, and those were 39 Newton meters. Next we're moving back up this side of the engine, looking at the power steering pump, putting that back in along with the reservoir over there, and trying to get everything back in order. Here we've placed the middle timing cover back on. Each of these bolts that you see here, 16 Newton meters each. Okay there, do-it-yourselfers. We are well into placing everything back onto this engine and getting it running again with the new timing belt and the whole new kit that goes along with it. Here we've got the upper thermostat housing. We're going to put this on next because it's right up top on the engine. New O-ring on the neck comes from that kit, the timing belt kit. You're going to have to use a gasket maker on the other water passage here. That's what's called for in the Toyota manual as well. We're going to be using some Permatex Ultra Gray. Thermostat housing is in. We're going to let it set for about an hour before we fully torque the bolts to let that gasket maker set up. Next, we're going to change the idler pulley. I've got a Gates model here that we're going to use. Again, this is not something you have to do. The factory unit's pretty good. I'll probably hang on to that just in case, matter of fact. But go ahead and replace it with a new unit, and should ensure some trouble-free use here. Okay, we've got the new idler pulley in. It is torqued to 39 Newton meters on that one bolt. By the way, guys, I mean, by the way, y'all, if you don't have a good torque wrench, would not recommend attempting this job. You're going to need a torque wrench. You're going to need to put these bolts at the proper torque, because you've got a lot of aluminum components in here, plastic components, and you will do some damage if you don't torque things to the proper specifications. And I'm providing you the specifications right out of the Toyota shop manual. Okay, next step, we're going to replace the fan. We've got the housing here where the accessory belt rides. Here's our fan out of the vehicle. We're going to replace the clutch since it's out. Again, clutch was working, but it can be a source of squealing and things of that nature. And while we have it out, we might as well replace it. We're going to go with our quality Aisin brand Toyota supplier. There's your part number, again from Rock Auto. Okay, we're working on putting the clutch onto the fan. Again, if there's any doubt as to the parts I'm using that are actually Toyota parts, there's the factory fan. You'll notice it's an aisin, which is the same brand as many of the parts we're using to replace. And it's a Toyota parts for a little cheaper price. Fan and the clutch are back in. Manual recommends right at 30 Newton meters on those bolts, but there's no way to get a torque wrench on that. Just tighten it up as hard as you can. Use a strap wrench. That usually works well. Next, we're going to work on the accessory serpentine belt. And again, we've got a diagram here. If you don't have one, you better take a picture of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, she goes off.
Here's the serpentine belt in place. Next stop, radiator. Close down the gap here. Okay, radiator's back in. It's a good time to go ahead and clean it out. We just cleaned it out with a shop vac because there was some dirt trapped in between the condenser and the radiator. Again, you've just got the 4 bolts. One here, one down there, and then again on the other side, 12 Newton meters on those bolts. Upper fan shrouds back in, 4 bolts on that. Very, very light torque on that, 5 to 7 Newton meters. All that is plastic. Next, we're putting in the lower fan shroud, and it just clips on to the upper fan shroud. We've also put the transmission cooler lines in place down on the bottom. Went ahead and connected those. Obviously, we're going to need to top off transmission fluid. Next up is the upper and lower radiator hoses. We're going to go with new units. These are from Daco. Make a good brand of hose, but this upper one is a little bit long, so we're going to trim both sides of that. The lower one looks like it should work just fine. Hoses back in, upper and lower radiator hoses. Now we're getting down to just about the end here. We're going to put the battery back in, going to put the air intake back in, and getting close to testing her out. Okay, we're almost there. We've got coolant refilled. Top off the automatic transmission fluid if necessary from the oil cooler, and we've got a battery terminal issue. I'm going to take care of that before we fire it up, but we'll be testing it here shortly. Again, when you're doing a big project like this, organization is key. We had all our parts laid out in line, had all our tools easily accessible, so helps big time when you've got even a small project, but particularly with a big project, to have those tools ready. Also enjoyed doing this project with my dad. He's a big mentor and has shown me a lot about vehicles, and he's a lot better than YouTube, believe me. So thanks, Dad. Appreciate it. Love you.
Love you.
And we'll see how it works here. All right, moment of truth here. Go ahead. That sounds good. We had some squealing before. Could have been a belt, could have been the fan clutch, but everything sounds smooth right now. Got a lot of wind here. Fan's working. Another successful operation. Thanks for watching.